The stars are right, and that means it's time for another episode of The Whisper in Darkness. I'm your host, the Man from Lang. Thank you very much for joining me today. On this episode, I am launching Knowledge is Power, the first in what I hope will be a series of videos that will take an in-depth look at scenarios from a solo player's perspective. I love playing the Arkham Horror LCG solo, however, there are some scenarios that are much more challenging than others in the solo format, due to their mechanics, the composition of their encounter decks, or both. Running headlong into these types of scenarios unprepared can be extremely frustrating for solo players, especially if you're new to the game. I'm hoping that after you watch this video, you will feel much better prepared to tackle these scenarios as part of a campaign or as a standalone. And what better way to kick off this series than dive into one of the most difficult scenarios the game has to offer solo players, Union and Disillusion, the 4th Mythos pack from the Circle Undone cycle. Needless to say, there will be extensive spoilers throughout if you care about that sort of thing. If you find this video useful, let me know in the comments which other scenarios you would like me to cover in future episodes. Before we get started, I'd like to thank the patrons of this channel for their tremendous support. The Arkham Horror LCG community is amazing, and these people have gone above and beyond to bring you content like these in-depth scenario reviews. If you'd like to support the channel and see your name up on this list, head over to patreon.com, sign up for a tier of your choice, and claim your rewards. That would be awesome. Without further ado, let's get started. Union and Disillusion is one of the most notoriously difficult solo scenarios in the game. And this video is going to attempt to answer 4 basic questions. What's at stake in this scenario? What are the rewards if you complete it? Why is this scenario so difficult for solo players? And how do you beat it if you are playing solo? What's at stake? Well, if the investigators became members of the Silver Twilight Lodge during Interlude 2, the Price of Progress, and were inducted into the Inner Circle during Interlude 3, the Inner Circle, during a campaign, they win the campaign in this scenario. Well, actually, the Silver Twilight Lodge wins the campaign, and the investigators win by default, but I guess we get to ride their coattails to victory. So you can actually finish the campaign if you happen to beat this scenario. If you don't happen to beat this scenario, it basically determines whether Carl Sanford possesses the secrets of the universe or Annette Mason is possessed by evil, based on the results you achieved in the other scenarios during the Circle Undone campaign. If Annette Mason is possessed by evil, the investigators will confront Annette Mason, reincarnated evil, in the clutches of chaos. If Carl Sanford possesses the secrets of the universe, the investigators will confront Carl, deathless fanatic, in the clutches of chaos. So what are the rewards if you play Union and Disillusion? Well, if you side with the Silver Twilight Lodge during the Circle Undone campaign, you can earn a maximum of 7 VP in this scenario. You can earn 3 from the Unvisited Isle locations. You can earn 1 VP from the Geist Trap location. You can earn 1 VP if you kill the Nether Mist, which is in the encounter deck, and you can earn an additional 2 VPs from killing Annette Mason. If you decided to side with the Coven, you can also earn a maximum of 7 VPs. You can earn the same amount from the locations as well as the Nether Mist, and you can earn 2 VPs from killing Joseph Miger, assuming that he is still alive at this point in the scenario. Now, you can earn a maximum of 7 VPs, but picking up those VPs will require quite a bit of work. And as I've mentioned, this scenario is quite difficult on solo, so earning that many victory points will be quite challenging. So why is this scenario so difficult for solo investigators? Well, the 5 circle actions, which is one of the main mechanics of the scenario, prompt very difficult skill tests for solo investigators to pass. The average value of the tokens in the Chaos Bag is quite low, even on standard difficulty. Haunted abilities on locations make discovering clues using investigate actions a risky proposition, and there are very few locations on the table, and most of the enemies, including the dreaded Whippoorwill, have the hunted keyword, so there is no place to hide in this scenario. And finally, to make matters worse, this scenario can dish out a lot of damage and horror. let's take a look at each of these factors individually. So the circle actions are the primary mechanic of Union and Disillusion, and they are extremely difficult for a solo investigator to pass. An investigator must succeed at 5 circle actions to have any hope of defeating this scenario. Unless you can complete all 5 circle actions and pass the skill tests, you will be locked out of the ending. So that is a huge barrier. The circle test on the Forbidding Shore, which is the second location that you will visit during this scenario, is either Intellect or Willpower 3. So it's not too difficult for most investigators to pass. It is only difficulty 3. However, the next 3 circle actions are chosen at random from a pool of 6 locations, and they test a combination of 2 skills and range in difficulty from 9 to 11. The biggest problem with this is the locations are chosen at random, so it is very difficult for an investigator to prepare for these skill tests on the circle actions. You don't know ahead of time what skills you will be testing, so it can be quite challenging, and if you hit one that you cannot pass, then unfortunately you are stuck. Finally, the circle action on the Geist Trap tests all 4 of your skills and is difficulty 20. So as you can imagine, an investigator who, like Jenny Barnes, who has an average of 3 in all 4 skills, she only has a base skill value of 12 when she encounters this particular location. So that will be a very difficult skill test for her to pass, next to impossible without a little help. Now, fortunately, Act 3A allows investigators to spend 1 clue as a free-triggered ability to reduce the difficulty of the circle test by 2. However, there are only 3 spare clues up for grabs in this scenario, which means the Geist Trap is still difficulty 14. If you are able to spend 3 clues on it. So even if you get the clues, this is going to be still a very difficult skill test to pass for an investigator with average skill values. The other factor working against investigators in this scenario is the Chaos Bag. The average value of the tokens in the Chaos Bag in Union and Disillusion is about -3 on standard difficulty. The Skull is only a -2, but if this skill test is during a circle action, you have to reveal another token, which, given the other negative tokens in the Chaos Bag, all but assures you that you are going to fail that circle skill test. The Cultist is a -3, and if you have no damage on you, you take a damage. If you have no horror, you take a horror. The Tablet is a -3, and if you fail, a spectral enemy at your location attacks you, even if it is exhausted. And finally, the Elder Thing is a -3. If this skill test is during a circle action and you fail, you resolve each haunted ability on your location. So, because the average value of the tokens in the Chaos Bag is around -3, that means an investigator making a skill test during a circle action needs to have a modified skill value that is at least 3 greater than the skill test difficulty, and you probably want to be at -4, or at least 4 up before you take the test to take that -4 out of the bag as well. So that means you not only have to raise your skill value up to meet the difficulty of the circle skill test, but then you need to exceed it by at least 3 or 4 if you want to trump the Chaos Bag. So the only token in the bag that can hurt you is the Tentacle. So for example, an investigator with average intellect and combat skill values who is making a skill test during the circle action at the Unvisited Isle Decayed Willow needs to commit at least 6 icons and or spend 6 resources on a typical talent asset to have a reasonable chance of succeeding. And unfortunately, this can be difficult to do once, much less 4 times, because you do have the 1 easy circle test to pass, but then you've got the 4 very difficult circle tests to pass. So while you might be able to muster up 6 icons and or 6 resources to spend on talents once. Doing that repeatedly throughout the scenario 4 times during a scenario is going to be quite challenging. Adding insult to injury is the Haunted ability, which appears on many locations in the Circle Undone campaign. There are 1 Shroud location, 2 Shroud locations, 1 3 Shroud location, and 3 4 Shroud locations in this scenario, and 4 Shroud locations with Haunted abilities are a nightmare for investigators with below average to average intellect. Discovering clues at those locations with dangerous Haunted abilities using investigate actions is an extremely risky thing to do, because chances are you will trigger the Haunted ability if you fail that investigate action. The Haunted abilities on the Unvisited Isle Standing Stones and the Unvisited Isle Forsaken Woods are particularly bad because they make skill tests during circle actions that much more difficult. As you can see here on the Standing Stones, until the end of the round, increase the difficulty of each skill test during a circle action by 2. So if you've already got a circle action that is difficulty 11, making that a 13 is going to put that out of reach for many a solo investigator. Meanwhile, the Haunted abilities on the Unvisited Isle Misty Clearing and Unvisited Isle Haunted Spring, as well as the Geist Trap, deal damage and horror to you, which is another theme of this particular scenario. Many of the, as you can see, these Haunted abilities will deal damage and horror. Some of the tokens in the Chaos Bag deal damage and horror, and there are many encounter cards that also deal damage and horror, so you need to be prepared to soak a lot of damage and horror in this scenario, and the Haunted abilities on the locations just add to that problem. Enemy management is another challenging aspect of this scenario. There are relatively few locations in this scenario. There are only 4 that begin on the table. Then you add another Unvisited Isle location and the Geist Trap later, and most of the enemies have the Hunter keyword, so there is no place to hide. So you really do need a way to kill enemies. Simply evading them is not going to be good enough in this scenario, because you will end up with enemies clogging up the relatively few locations that are on the table. Now, the good thing is there are relatively few enemies in the encounter deck. However, one of those enemies does happen to be Whippoorwill, which can make it next to impossible to pass a skill test during a circle action, because each investigator at a Whippoorwill's location gets -1 to all of their skills. So if you are trying to pass a circle action, say a difficulty 9 circle action, and you're already losing 2, your skills are already being reduced by 2, and then you've got to factor in the Chaos Bag, which could potentially reduce your skill values by another 3. That is a lot of ground that an investigator has to make up in order to pass one of those tests if the Whippoorwill is on the table. You can also encounter the missing person enemies in this scenario. They are difficult to encounter, but they are a bit of a pain because they do have a lot of health, and they also have a fairly good stats. Gabriella Misra here has 5 combat, 4 health, and 2 evade. She has the alert and hunter keywords, of course, and her forced effect is after you successfully attack Gabriella Misra, if she is ready, take 1 horror. So there is more horror and damage incoming from the missing persons. Gabriella is the type of enemy that gives Mark Harrigan, even gives Mark Harrigan pause because of that 5 fight value. So she is not easy to beat, especially if you are dealing with Whippoorwills and several other enemies at the same time. Now, once you advance to Act 2B in Union and Disillusion, you spawn the Spectral Watcher, who is a common reoccurring enemy throughout the Circle Undone. The Spectral Watcher has only 3 fight, but he has 5 health, which makes him very resilient, and that will take an average investigator, say, 3 actions to kill him if you're using a weapon. And the problem is, killing him doesn't get rid of him. It simply triggers his forced effect, which will mean that if he is defeated, Instead of discarding him, you heal all damage from him and exhaust him, and he does not ready during the upkeep phase. Now, killing the Spectral Watcher is one of the tasks you must complete in this scenario, but you have to do it at the Geist Trap. So if you are not prepared to deal with him, there is a chance that you may have to kill him not once, but twice during a scenario, which could be difficult for some investigators. Now, the Spectral Watcher is not the only enemy that you have to worry about toward the end of this scenario. Once you advance to Act 3B, you have the potential to spawn several more enemies at the Geist Trap, including Annette Mason, who we meet in the Witching Hour. And that can really put a lot of pressure on a solo investigator, because you'll be at the Geist Trap, you'll have the Spectral Watcher bearing down on you, and then you may also have Annette Mason and or other witches to deal with. And so it will really put a solo investigator's enemy management tools to the test. As I mentioned at the top, this scenario also spits out a lot of damage and horror. The combination of Eager for Death and Death Approaches, 2 treachery cards in the encounter deck, has the potential to drive an investigator with below average to average sanity insane very, very quickly. I have heard horror stories of investigators who haven't even been able to make it to the Forbidding Shore before this combo has triggered and driven them insane. Meanwhile, the combination of Marked for Death and Psychopomp's Song has the potential to kill an investigator with below average to average health, because you take 2 damage from Marked for Death, and then you will take 2 additional damage from Psychopomp's Song, so for a total of 4 damage right off the top. And there are, if you are playing a Squishy Seeker, that could be potentially fatal. As I mentioned earlier, the Haunted abilities on several of the Unvisited Isle locations and the Geist Trap also deal damage and horror, and if you pull certain tokens from the Chaos Bag, you will also suffer damage and horror, and the Missing Persons deal damage and horror. So there is a lot of damage and horror being pumped out by this scenario, so you will need some way to soak that damage and horror, heal it, or otherwise mitigate it if you're going to be successful. So how do you beat this scenario? Well, there are several different options. The first one, surprisingly enough, is to simply resign and not play it at all. You can play an investigator who is a survivor or off-class survivor. They have some advantages. You can try to automatically succeed at the skill tests during circle actions. You can use Chaos Bag manipulation to try to change the tokens that you are drawing from the bag. You can spend a pile of resources to try to power yourself through those skill tests by boosting your base skill values. You can use cards like Trial by Fire to reset your base skill values to higher values. Cheating clues at the haunted locations is a great way of avoiding those haunted abilities. You can use direct damage to kill the Whippoorwill, and of course packing damage and horror mitigation tools is very helpful to counter all of the damage and horror that this scenario puts out. We're going to take a look at each of these solutions here briefly. So the first option is to resign. If you didn't side with the Silver Twilight Lodge during the Circle Undone campaign, there's really not that much at stake in this scenario. This is a problem with several of the scenarios in the Circle Undone campaign. There's just not very much on the line. So if you're not that confident that you can pass the circle tests during the 5 circle actions, you can resign as early as turn 1 and simply skip this scenario altogether. Now, if you're confident in your ability to discover clues, you can earn up to 3 victory points before you resign if you're able to investigate the 2 Unvisited Isle locations that start on the table, and you are able to kill the Nether Mist, which is hiding somewhere in the encounter deck. Once you advance to Act 2A, you can earn up to 4 victory points. However, you will be trapped at that Unvisited Isle location until you advance to Act 3A, at which point you'll have to contend with the Spectral Watcher as well, which while you make your escape. So you can earn at least 2 victory points from locations, 3 if you kill the Nether Mist before you resign. But if you try to go for that 4th victory point, you are going to have to, you may end up trapped briefly at an unvisited isle location, and you're going to have to deal with the Spectral Watcher. So you'll have to decide whether that is worth the risk. Now, playing a Survivor, Investigator, or off-class Survivor has several advantages in this scenario. You need to pass at least 5 difficult skill tests during circle actions, and many of the cards that let you do this are transient assets, events, or skills. And of course, Survivors and off-class Survivors are the masters of returning cards from their discard pile back to their hands so you can play them again. Cards like Resourceful, Scrounge for Supplies, and a Chance Encounter, either level of a Chance Encounter, can be very helpful in bringing back those cards to pass those circle tests if you use them. So playing a Survivor can certainly give you a leg up in this particular scenario. Now, automatically succeeding at the circle actions is another option. Passing skill tests during circle actions is a breeze if you can automatically succeed. Unfortunately, the list of cards that enable investigators to automatically succeed is very short, and some of them require you to pull an Elder Sign token during the skill test, which requires some sort of Chaos Bag manipulation. Beloved from the Innsmouth Conspiracy lets you automatically succeed, but of course you need to pull a Bless token, which is an option. You could fill the bag with Bless tokens to try to counteract some of those negative tokens in the bag. And if you pull them during a circle test, you could automatically succeed. Unfortunately, you have to remove Beloved from the game in order to do that. So while you will automatically succeed, you only get to do it once with each copy of Beloved. And since you only have 2 copies, that's 2 circle tests. You're still shy. You need to pass 2 others, though, so this is only a part of a solution. You can use Stroke of Luck as well. Again, it will allow you to automatically succeed, but once again, it is exiled once you play it, as long as you don't pull a Tentacle token. So this will allow you to automatically succeed, but once again, you will have to exile that card. So it is only good for passing 2 circle tests. You can use a combo card like 3 Aces. If you can get all 3 copies of 3 Aces and commit them to a circle test, then you will automatically succeed, and you will draw some cards and gain some resources to boot. Of course, the problem with this is that it is a combo card, so unless you have a way to assemble the combo quickly, that could be problematic, and it is only good for one test, and then you will have to either find a way to get the 3 Aces back in your deck and then reassemble the combo for the next circle test, and I'm afraid there simply isn't enough time to do that. Now, there are several investigators that have Elder Sign abilities that let them automatically succeed, namely investigators like Father Mateo, Preston Fairmont, and Wendy Adams. If they can pull Elder Sign tokens in certain situations, they can automatically succeed. Of course, then you've got to figure out a way to pull those Elder Sign tokens. One option is Against All Odds. It allows you to pull multiple tokens from the bag, depending on the difference between your base skill value and the difficulty of the skill test, which, as we know in the circle actions, can be quite great. Chaos Bag Manipulation is another option that investigators can use to help even the odds in Union and Disillusion. Cards that let you manipulate, cancel, or ignore the tokens that you draw from the Chaos Bag can help you pass the skill tests that you take during circle actions. We've already discussed Against All Odds, but there are many others. Mystics have access to cards like Counterspell that will cancel chaos tokens like the Skull Cultist Tablet or Elder Thing. Defiance lets you ignore those tokens. You can use Grotesque Statue to draw multiple tokens and choose the one you want, so you can fish for those Elder Signs or +1s to help you out. Rogues have access to lucky dice, which also lets them pull multiple tokens as long as they can spend the resources, although this can backfire if you pull a tentacle token. Mystics also have Olive McBride, who can reveal multiple tokens, although she's a little bit riskier than the grotesque statue, because while you do get to reveal 3 tokens, you have to resolve 2 of them. So the chance that you will get that you will draw just the say a -3, a +1, and an Elder Sign, and get to resolve the +1 and Elder Sign is quite low. But she can certainly help you pick and choose which tokens you encounter. Finally, there's Narcotic Manuscripts, a tome in the Seeker class that if you spend a secret, you don't have to draw a Chaos token at all, which is fantastic. If you can raise your skill value up to the difficulty of the skill test, then you could trigger Narcotic Manuscripts and not draw a Chaos token at all. So say if you are playing a Seeker like Daisy, for example, she has 3 willpower and 5 intellect, so she would have 8. If she's taking a difficulty 9 skill test, she would just need to raise her skill value by 1 and then trigger Narcotic Manuscripts, and she would pass that test. So that is certainly an option. However, Narcotic Manuscripts costs 5 experience points, and after the first 2 scenarios in the Circle Undone, experience can be hard to come by. So that is a factor to consider. Now, you can also spend resources to raise your base skill values to pass these skill tests. Each skill appears on 3 of the 6 unvisited isle locations, which are randomly selected. So if you play a card like Higher Education 3 or Streetwise 3 from Blood on the Altar, which are 2 of the most efficient talents in the game, you can spend resources to raise your base skill value during 5 of the 6 skill tests. However, unfortunately, that does leave 1 unvisited isle location unaccounted for, which could prevent you from completing the scenario if it happens to be the one you draw randomly. So if you are playing a Seeker, for example, and you draw Unvisited Isle Moss-Covered Steps, its circle action requires you to test combat and agility, 2 skills that are not very good for most Seekers, and it is a difficulty 10. So if you are playing somebody like Harvey Walters, for example, who has 1 combat and 2 agility, your base skill value will be 3, and the difficulty will be 10, and that is going to be extremely difficult for Harvey to pass unless you use a talent like if you happen to draw this card. So while boosting your skill values with talents and resources is one option, it is not a cure-all, because there is still that 1 unvisited isle location in the deck that can trip you up. Now, Higher Education 3 and Streetwise 3 are some of the most efficient talents in the game because you get the biggest bang for your resources if you use them. Other talents, such as Arcane Studies 4, are also very good, although they aren't quite as efficient as the previous 2. So if you were playing a Mystic, you could drop Arcane Studies 4 on the table. You'd get 2 free resources every turn, which could boost one of your skills by +2, and then you could spend other resources to further boost your skills. Of course, the problem with spending all of these resources on circle tests is that you need a very powerful resource engine to fuel these talents, and that can be tricky to assemble if you're playing classes outside of, say, Rogue or Seeker, which have access to many ways to generate resources. Of course, if you're going this way, you also need to generate all those resources multiple times for multiple skill tests, so that can really put a lot of pressure on an investigator. But it is an option if you use, say, these in combination with some of the other cards we talked about. You can use some resources to boost your skills to pass some skill tests, and then use other cards to pass some of the others. Resetting your base skill value is another way that investigators can try to pass the tests on circle actions in Union and Disillusion. A rogue or off-class rogue could use a card like Money Talks to make their base skill value for the test equal to half the number of resources in their resource pool. However, you will need anywhere from 26 to 48 resources in your resource pool and a way to play this card repeatedly to make this a viable strategy. An investigator like Preston Fairmont, for example, can use this card in combination with Scrounge for supplies because he does have access to the survivor card pool, so he could play this multiple times. However, he will need a lot of resources. Say he is at a location like the Unvisited Isle Haunted Springs, which has a difficulty of 9. Now, as we talked about earlier, that 9 is actually 4 higher because of the tokens in the Chaos Bag, so it's really a 13. So if you want to have a difficulty or a skill value of 13 in order to almost guarantee that you pass, you will need at least 26 resources in your resource pool. And this just gets higher if you are taking the skill test at the Geist Trap, which is difficulty 20. Even if you are able to spend 3 clues to reduce the difficulty to 14, you will need to add 4 to that to account for the tokens in the Chaos Bag, which brings you to 18, and then double that to 36. So you will need a lot of resources in your resource pool and a mighty fine resource generation engine if you want to pursue this strategy. Now, as I mentioned, survivors do have a leg up on some of the other investigators in the game. They have a Trial by Fire, which lets them set the base skill value, the base value of one of their skills to 5. So if you get lucky with the Unvisited Isle locations, you can set your base skill value, one of your base skill values to 5, and hopefully you will have a 5 in or 4 or a 5 in another skill, which would put you at around 9. So that's pretty good. So then you would only need to spend a few other commit a few cards or spend some resources to put you over the top. Finally, there is the Red Gloved Man. He is an excellent option since he will raise the base value of 2 skills to 6 until the end of the Mythos phase, and he is fast. So what you can do with him is you can go to an Unvisited Isle location, reveal it, find out what the skill test will be, which 2 skills it is testing. Then you can play the Red Gloved Man as a free triggered ability and set those 2 skills to 6. So you're already sitting at a 12, which gives you a very good chance of passing many of those circle tests. Now, the trick with the Red Gloved Man is that, of course, he disappears at the end of the Mythos phase, so he is he doesn't stay in play. So you need to play cards again like a Chance Encounter 0 or a Chance Encounter 2 to bring him back from your discard pile when you need him to pass circle tests. And so again, playing a survivor who has access to a lot of those cards that can bring cards back from the discard pile to your hand could be very handy if you want to pursue this type of strategy. Besides the passing the skill tests on the circle actions, you've got to deal with all the other factors in this scenario. Cheating clues from locations is a great way to deal with the haunted ability on locations. Investigate actions are risky because if you fail an investigate action, you will trigger the haunted ability. So finding ways to grab clues without taking those actions is a very helpful strategy. And all of the classes have ways to do this. For example, you have the Guardians who have cards like Scene of the Crime and Agency Backup. Seekers have Working the Hunch and the Pendant of the Queen. Rogues have Intel Report and Lola Santiago. Mystics have Drawn to the Flame and Read the Signs. Read the Signs being particularly nice because it nixes haunted abilities entirely. And survivors also have cards like Gravedigger Shovel and Mysterious Raven. So packing as many of these cards as you can so you don't have to take investigate actions is very helpful. Killing the Whippoorwill is another big plus in this scenario if you can do so. Whippoorwill can be extremely dangerous, especially in multiples. I believe it was the Mythos Busters who coined the phrase the Whippoorwill to describe when you get more than one of these things on the table. So one is manageable, but once you get two, reducing your skill values by two, all of your skills by two, it can be very difficult to get out of that, especially if you have other enemies bearing down on you. So finding a way to get rid of the whippoorwills as quickly as possible is one of the keys to succeeding in this scenario. Again, many of the classes, each of the classes has a way to deal with the whippoorwill, preferably without having to take an action to engage it. Guardians are the best off. They have cards like Agency Backup, Alice Luxley, Beat Cop 2, Zoe's Cross, to deal direct damage to the whippoorwill without having to engage it. Or they could use cards like Get Over Here on Taunt to engage the whippoorwill and without taking an action and then kill it. The Seekers have Blood Right. If they can get the Occult Lexicon down and get Blood Right into their hand, they can kill the whippoorwill that way. Rogues have Lila O'Rourke, Coup de Grace, and Small Favor that will deal direct damage to the whippoorwills. The Mystics, if you're playing Agnes Baker, she has a way to do it, or you can just use Storm of Spirits level 0 or 3 to nuke the whippoorwills and every other enemy at your location for that matter. While finally the Survivors have Lantern, which you can discard to deal direct damage to an enemy at your location. So killing the whippoorwills is a top priority. They are too dangerous to be left alive, and if you have a way to do that by dealing direct damage without engaging them, all the better. Finally, you need to find ways to mitigate the damage in horror that you will inevitably suffer when you are playing this scenario. Enemies, treacheries, and locations have the potential to dish out a lot of damage in horror, so it's important to include ways to soak that horror with cards like allies or other assets, mitigate it or heal it as much as possible. And again, all classes have some ways of doing this. I mean, all classes have access to allies that can soak horror for you, but they also have access to cards like I've Had Worse, that can turn that damage and horror into resources if you're playing a Guardian. The Seekers have Logical Reasoning, which can heal 2 horror. They've also got the excellent Mr. Rook, who can soak quite a bit of damage and horror, although he was hit in the most recent update to the list of taboos. So if you are following that list, he will cost you 4 experience points. Rogues have cards like Lonnie Ritter and Liquid Courage. Mystics have David Renfield and Deny Existence. Deny Existence being particularly nice because it works against either damage or horror. And if you are playing the level 5 upgrade for it, it's even better. And finally, Survivors have plenty of ways to soak damage and horror. They have Peter Sylvester. They have cards like the Cherished Keepsake and the Leather Coat. They've got cards like Devil's Luck that can prevent up to 10 damage and or horror, and so Survivors are in very good shape. I believe they've also got Jessica Hyde, who they can use to soak damage. So again, Survivors have an advantage here because they do have access to so much damage and horror prevention. That brings me to the deck that I used to beat Union and Disillusion on solo. I played it in standalone, and after taking a look at all the factors that I would need to overcome, I settled on playing Tommy Muldoon. I initially had considered playing a Survivor, but I wanted to... playing a Survivor seemed too obvious, so I wanted to try to play an Investigator who wasn't necessarily a main class Survivor, and Tommy seemed to check all the boxes. The strategy I used to beat this scenario in solo is playing the Red Gloved Man repeatedly to pass the skill tests during circle actions. So I would drop the Red Gloved Man down, pass a circle test. Sometimes I would get lucky and pass 2 of them in one turn, which can be exceptionally good. He would disappear during the Mythos phase, and then I would simply bring him back from my discard pile using a chance encounter. And if I was missing a chance encounter, I could always find a chance encounter in my discard pile with Scrounge for supplies. So I was able to play the Red Gloved Man repeatedly and then bring him out again when I needed to pass the circle test at the Geist Trap to finish off the game. Now, Tommy also has access to cards like Evidence and Scene of the Crime that let you discover clues at locations without taking investigate actions. So that deals with the problem of the haunted abilities. Tommy has access to cards like Beat Cop 2 that he can use to defeat the Whippoorwill without engaging it. That comes in extremely handy. And finally, Tommy has many ways to soak damage and horror, including powerful allies like the Red Gloved Man and assets like Cherished Keepsake and Leather Coat. The beauty of playing an investigator like Tommy is that if that asset is defeated, he gets to gain resources and then shuffle it back into his deck so he has access to it again. So if you take too much damage and horror early, you can discard your Leather Coat and then it goes back into your draw deck, and then you can pull it out again. So Tommy seemed to check all the boxes for me, and he was successful on his second attempt at defeating this scenario on solo, but I don't think by any means he is the only investigator that could beat this on solo difficulty. So in conclusion, I think when I look at Union and Disillusion, it is a very challenging scenario in the solo format, especially if you are encountering it for the first time during a campaign and you haven't played it before. Chances are it is not going to end well for you because you will not be prepared for it. However, if you are playing solo, it can be beaten if your deck is prepared to deal with a lot of the issues that I have talked about in this video. If you are tackling this scenario as part of a campaign, then you really need to start planning for it at the beginning of the campaign. Otherwise, your odds of defeating it are extremely low. Say you decide that you like the idea of using the Red Gloved Man. The Red Gloved Man costs 5 experience points, and you're going to need 2 copies. So there are 10 experience points right there. So you need a way to earn those experience points so you can afford to purchase the Red Gloved Man. A viable deck for this scenario is also going to include ways to, it really needs to include ways to pass these skill tests during circle actions. If you don't have a way to do that, then this scenario, you are simply going to be locked out of completing it. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. You need to be able to pass all 5 circle tests, and if you can't do that, then you are unfortunately not going to be able to complete it. Your deck should also have ways to discover clues without taking investigate actions. That eliminates the risk of triggering haunted abilities, some of which can make those skill tests during circle actions even more difficult to pass. You need a way to defeat the Whippoorwill, preferably without engaging it or making a skill test. If you can deal with the Whippoorwill early, I believe there are 3 of them in the deck, so you do need a way to deal with them. Otherwise, you could simply find yourself caught in the whirlpool and suffer -2, or -1, -2, even -3 to your all of your skills, which will simply make it impossible to pass those skill tests on circle actions. Finally, you do need a way to mitigate damage and or horror. This scenario pumps out an awful lot of both, and if your investigator has below average health or sanity, you are going to need to protect them from all of the damage and horror this thing spits out. Otherwise, it could end very quickly for you. However, there is a solution. If your deck comes up short in any of these areas, especially when it comes to passing the skill tests during circle actions, then you do have the option of resigning on turn 1, or if you want to risk it, you can run in and try to grab a couple of easy VPs before you resign, and then you can simply move on to play in the clutches of chaos rather than risking a physical or mental trauma. Now, as part of this video, I am putting together a playthrough of the Circle Undone with my Tommy Muldoon deck to see if I can, in fact, beat this solo during a campaign. I have recorded the first 2 episodes, and I will be recording more in the future. So look for those to be released in the upcoming days and weeks. So far, the campaign has gone very well, and I am looking forward to pitting Tommy against Union and Disillusion solo in a campaign setting. Of course, as with all scenarios, things will go wrong, and sometimes you will pull the wrong cards at the wrong time. And playing a scenario like Union and Disillusion, that there just isn't a lot of room for error. And you could make it all the way to the end and then get a bad pull, and the Whippoorwills appear, and you've got the Whippoorwills, the Spectral Watcher, and a Net Mason to deal with, and things just go really badly. But that's the risk you take. With the Arkham Horror LCG, sometimes you can get a very smooth run and nothing goes wrong, and other times everything can go wrong. And with a scenario like this one, if things start to go wrong, you can quickly end up getting buried underneath it. That said, I have enjoyed playing Union and Disillusion solo. It is a very challenging scenario, but that just makes the reward for beating it all that much sweeter. And I hope that you will give it a try, and I hope this guide will help you notch your own victory against one of the most challenging solo scenarios in the game. That's going to do it for this episode. If you enjoy what you hear, remember to like, comment, and subscribe. If you need to contact me, I can be reached at manfromlang@gmail.com. I am also on Twitter at manfromlang. Until the stars are right, keep your shotgun close and your elder sign closer. Take care out there, and happy investigating.